never met somebody before who's done perhaps more than 1,000 heart transplants.
And for me, I think it was heart transplant that actually ended up getting me to Puttaparthi and then getting me to see Swami. That was the way he attracted me. That was his magnet for me to come there. Again, I'm an instrument. So the source of my gift is going to be God or Sai Baba. And I think he's using me purely as an instrument, and he's used that instrument for several things. He's used me as an instrument to help other people, and he's also used that instrument for him to help me. That he was driving in his car, and his heart basically went into a bad rhythm because his heart was so sick. And so he fainted at the wheel, and he hit a gas line. They found him about 200 feet away from where his car had hit the gas line. And so they asked him, what was going on, and he said that somebody in an orange robe pulled him out of the car, and then the person in the orange robe told him to, a person is going to tell you where you're going to have surgery, go to that person because he will take care of you. When I'm doing a case, I can see the ego come out where I'm saying, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you take a step back and you say, it's not me. It's him and I'm his instrument. And don't force the issue. Just accept it and let it go. Don't let your ego get in the way. And that's a lesson that he certainly taught me. So when you talk about transformation, a cardiac surgeon, we can have big egos. And he certainly chopped mine down. There's always a little bit of ego. And that's gotten me nothing but trouble. And I know it has. So, the more I can, and I think I know Swami's working on even chopping that little bit of ego away. When you're sitting in the veranda, you're waiting for Swami, you actually go into a next level. And I think I have now understood a lot more about spirituality over the last 5 years, not getting an interview, than in the past. The days to come.
World-renowned cardiosurgeon Dr. Val Jeevanandam of Chicago. More impressive than his performance of 1,000 plus heart transplants is his love of holy man Sri Satya Sai Baba and how Baba has transformed his life. Welcome to Souljourns. This interview was recorded in the city of Chicago in June 2010. Dr. Val Jeevanandam, it's a pleasure to talk to you on Souljourns today. I'm not sure where to begin, so you're going to have to help me. I've never met somebody before who's done perhaps more than 1,000 heart transplants, nor have I met somebody with such accomplishments from the field of medicine who's also on a profound spiritual path. Your teacher is Sai Baba. Which of those two subjects do you want to talk about first?
I'll talk about Sai Baba first. Because he set me on the path on whatever I have done in my profession. And I think in the twists about Sai Baba, both of them are very connected. And when Swami wants, when Sai Baba says come, you come in different pathways. And for me, I think it was heart transplant that actually ended up getting me to Puttaparthi and then getting me to see Swami. That was the way he attracted me. That was his magnet for me to come there, because I had to come there for a reason.
So back up, tell me the story. You didn't know about Sai Baba before that first visit?
So I'll tell you how it started.
Okay.
So first of all, my parents were Sai Baba devotees before I was, and that was in the late 80s, and they were in Phoenix, Arizona. And every single time I would go to Phoenix, they'd want me to go to bhajans, and they would want me to go and read books about Swami and things, and I was not interested at that time. And Swami says everything takes time, and there's a right time for things, and that just wasn't my right time to find Swami. And so I would do things such as if they would always have bhajans at about 3 o'clock on a Sunday, so I'd make sure my ticket was taken before 3 o'clock on Sunday, so I wouldn't have to go to bhajans. And
you weren't real fond of bhajans.
No, I wasn't fond of bhajans. I wasn't really fond of spirituality. I wasn't really fond of a person that people call Swami, right? Because you always have this bad idea that a Swami is a cult leader, and exactly. That's the way when you grow up in the United States, all those rishis, and you hear bad things about them.
And half of them seem to be true in the end.
That's right.
So
I avoided this very much, and my mom would give me books, and then she would send me tapes about bhajans or the devotional songs, and I would tell my mom that I would get to read them, but I never did. And then, one day I was on my commute to work, and I put on a tape, and because it just happened to, it was the only tape I had in the car, I put the tape on. And get out of the car after my commute, and I felt a lot more refreshed. It was a lot better listening to, singing, and it was much more uplifting than listening to world news, which can, as you know, can get very depressing. So then I started getting interested in the bhajans, and then slowly when I went to Phoenix, instead of taking my ticket before 3 o'clock, you end up taking it so it was after bhajans. And so bhajans were the first thing to really attract me towards Swami, and got a little bit more involved. And then the real turning point occurred when I was taking a trip to Arizona. And it was from Philadelphia, it's about 6 to 7 hours. And so, you always have to be prepared with a book. And so I had packed my books, and I know I'd put a John Grisham novel in there.
So it wasn't all medicine, it was novels as well.
Oh yeah, and then so I get on the plane, I open up, realizing that I'm going to have Grisham for about 5 hours, and I could not find the book. That book was just not in the bag, and the only book that was there was The Vision of Sai by Rita Bruce. And I'm just thinking to myself, how am I going to spend my time on this plane? I started reading the book, and it just captivated me. And I didn't sleep on the plane. I finished the whole book on the plane. And when I got out of the plane, I decided I was going to be a vegetarian. And that was 1993. And since then, I've been a vegetarian.
So the teachings of her book, The Story of Sai Baba, Rita Bruce's narrative voice, transformed your life like that on an airplane ride?
I was on an airplane ride, yes.
Boy, would she be delighted to hear this. We just met her for the first time this past winter in Prashanti. We spent a long, several-day satsang in her home this summertime. Went to Ottawa for a retreat with her, and she's such a wonderful teacher. All she wants to be is an instrument to help people find Baba within. She scored 100% with you.
And Swami says everybody is his instrument.
Yes.
And everybody works in their ways through him for what he wants to have them accomplish. And certainly that book was my turning point. And other people have read that book and have never had that same power.
I was going to say, it's not quite a million seller. She's great at what she does, and it's a wonderful book, because I've read it too, and Jody knows it backward and forward. But how can that happen to a man who's above average intelligence, who knows something about the world, whose parents have been on a spiritual path, but he's seeing life differently for himself, and then in one fell swoop that happens?
Well, I think it can only happen because Swami decided that was my time. It's nothing inherent. It was just, it was amazing because, when I go home to Arizona, my mom's prepared this huge meal, the sun coming home. And I was a devout non-vegetarian at that point. I got off the plane and I said, "Mom, I'm a vegetarian now." She almost nearly freaked out.
Okay, so let's go that step forward.
So then we started becoming much closer to Swami, and then we were in Philadelphia, and we wanted to go to a Sai center. And we looked high and we looked low, and that was before the real time of the internet.
Yeah.
It didn't even exist then, so that was all phone calls and doing, networking.
They're not very well advertised.
No. And so couldn't find a Sai center. And then all of a sudden one day, somebody called us up, and we didn't even know this person. They called up and they said, "Hey, we hear you're looking for a Sai center." And lo and behold, that Sai center was exactly about 5 miles away from our home. And we started going there. And that was the Doylestown Center. And it was a very, very small center. And you know how Swami, he sets a journey that fits a person. It's all an individualized, customized pathway. And so that Sai Center was perfect for us at that time.
Well, so was the book in that bag perfect for you at that time.
Absolutely.
And your mother there prodding you along, failing to do any good until you're ready for many, many years. So I'm especially interested in this answer to this question from you because you are a scientist. And yet these I would call leelas, these divine pranks from some divine being who puts lessons unmistakably in your path at these junctures. What do you make of that? Do you buy that?
As you said, as a scientist, it is hard to fathom that. However, I've had so many of them, and then when you reflect back and you realize that your personality is being shaped, your character is being shaped, your perception of the world is being shaped, you realize that there is a higher being who is doing that shaping. And one can call it coincidences, psi-incidences, whatever you want to call it, but there is a shaping going on. And I certainly see that transformation. One time we had an interview, and he always likes to make fun of people, and it's actually, we miss that now because he doesn't do it as much. But he always calls me his coconut tree surgeon.
And what's the connection there?
Because I'm tall.
Oh.
He says you live among the coconuts. And so he was saying that I transplant hearts, and then he goes on and talks about transplantation. Then he stopped, he looked around, he goes, yeah, but he transplants hearts, but I'm the only one who can transform hearts. And certainly he has done that for me.
Well put, well put. That's all right. The doorbell rings, and we'll just go on. I'll edit that out. Nice doorbell. We just stopped, then go on. Okay. Were you going to add to that?
Yeah, so...
In fact, say that last thing again. He says, he describes you as a person who transplants hearts.
Correct. So, I've had interviews with Swami where he's sitting down, he's talking about people's professions, and each one of those interviews has a certain theme. So, several times he has referred to me as, a transplant surgeon. Then he builds you up by saying, how great a transplant surgeon somebody is and how he's helped people. And then he'll stop me and say, yes, but he transplants hearts. I'm the only one who can actually transform hearts. And clearly that's what he's done for me.
And that notion cannot be minimized because people ask me over and over again, it's great to tell us stories about Swami materializing things, but can you tell us stories about how he transformed people's lives? Really, that's key, isn't it?
And that's the most important thing, because he has materialized things for me, and they're fantastic when you get them and you treasure them, but you realize it's the transformation of the character and the soul, which in the long term is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And you need to reflect on that to realize how much one has changed.
Well, now as a scientist, looking back on this and having no problems with it, because even though science has its own priorities and rules and menus for you to help characterize what truth is, spirituality is a whole different set of menu items. And do you find the two compatible on any level? Do you blend the two ever, your spirituality with your scientific pursuit?
Well, let's say as a scientist, I'm a physician. Mm-hmm. So there's medicine that I need to follow, and then there's spirituality as well. And they do combine in certain levels. For instance, he's given me the privilege of working at the Puttaparthi Hospital, and I've gone there on a regular basis. The super specialty hospital, right? And people always say, "Oh, wow, you're going there, you're working. It's a great charity work." And then, I come to realize that it's more charity work that he's giving me than I'm giving to anybody else, because it's been one of the avenues that has helped transform me. Let me give you an example. Many years ago, I started working there, I think, first time in 94 or 95, and one of those years. And at that time, there was always this competition about how many cases have you done, because other people would come and work for a week or 2 weeks at a time. And when you start, they would always say, oh, this doctor came and he did 40 cases in a week, so how many are you going to do? Mm-hmm. So there was always this little bit of a race, and that's competition. Mm-hmm. And that's what Swami says that you need to break away from, because there's no reason to be competitive, jealous, envious, etc. But clearly was at that time. So you want to do a lot of cases. And it was an evening, and we had already done 2 cases, and they basically said, Swami's giving a discourse at 5 o'clock, and it's already 2 o'clock, so we'll never finish a case in time, so why don't we just stop for the day? But I wanted to do those cases. And I said, now listen, you just get out of my way, I'll do this case in 1.5 hours, and we will go and listen to Swami talk. Mm-hmm. So we started that case, and ultimately the patient did well, but nothing went right. Okay, it just took us 7 hours to do a case that should have taken about an hour and a half. And it was just, one of those things where, any foreseeable complication happened over and over again. So the next day in Darshan line, Swami just looked at me, he smiled at me and said, boy, that was not a short case, was it? And it hit me. It didn't hit me at that time as much as it hit me later, that one needs to follow the circumstances of the time, right? There is a reason for everything. And if your plane gets canceled, if there's something that you just cannot control, well, then you need to accept it. And now if a patient might say, hey, I just don't want to have surgery, and it may disrupt your schedule, it may do a lot of other things, but I listen to that. And I understand that there is a certain spiritual force that's very important in making that patient better. So if a patient says, hey, I don't want to have surgery today, maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow is a better day, although it's disruptive, I've accepted that. And I say, okay, if you don't want it, it's not happening. And just like that, when I'm doing a case, I can see the ego come out where I'm saying, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you take a step back and you say, it's not me, it's him and I'm his instrument. And don't force the issue. Just accept it and let it go. Don't let your ego get in the way. And that's a lesson that he certainly taught me. So when you talk about transformation, a cardiac surgeon, we can have big egos. And he certainly chopped mine down.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think over and over again, Swami identifies ego as the biggest lesson almost all of us have. I mean, your wife Sheila doesn't have an ego problem, and I can see that readily. But men, more so than most women, but even many women have that as issue number one to deal with. And the higher up the ladder of professional expertise you are, I'm just guessing that becomes more and more of a challenge. So when you're in the throes of, let's say, competition or an argument or a discussion, and you can tell when ego comes up from the chest and starts to become an issue in addition to the common sense you're trying to exercise, how do you handle it? Knowing this about Swami now, knowing that this is his big issue that he wants us to conquer, how do you tame it?
Well, use a lot of we instead of I.
There you go.
And sometimes you're in a heated argument with somebody, and you're saying how well the team did. Although maybe you were the biggest part of the team to actually accomplish something, and you just want to scream at him and goes, "This is what I want to do," because that's the right thing to do. Then immediately Swami's voice kind of comes in my mind saying, "Okay, destroy that ego, destroy the I." And then you realize that other people's perceptions may be correct. There are other viewpoints in life, and that whatever one accomplishes, it's a we accomplishing it as opposed to an I. So then you kind of take a step back and you realize that, it's my viewpoint is not necessarily the only viewpoint, and it may not even be the correct viewpoint, it may not be the best viewpoint. Listen to others and let them have their say. Now, when you're doing an operation and you have to make a quick decision, you may ask other people for opinions, but at that point it's not a democracy, and you need to do it.
Yeah.
And the only person then I just will do the best I can and leave the rest up in the hands of God, because I'm his instrument. So whatever the result is going to be, what he's deemed the result to be, and that he just made me the instrument to get to that result.
There are plenty of scientists, I'm sure, plenty of good cardiologists, heart surgeons, who don't have a spiritual track going for them necessarily. Maybe it's nature, maybe it's something else that I can't relate to. But they don't have what I know you have going for you. I guess the question I want to ask is, what about those instances, and I'm sure they're rare, when there's total abject failure? You lose the patient. It's a young person. Doesn't make any difference what the age is. And you've called upon Swami to be your guide, to speak through you, to operate through you, and still the results turn out to be that. How do you process that?
So that was one of the first things I asked Swami during an interview, because at that time, I was younger, doing a lot of transplants where it's a life or death situation. And it's a case where you may be having somebody who's dying, you do an operation, and with God's grace, the patient may do fantastically well. They may also not do so well. Mm-hmm. And so I actually asked him in an interview, I said, Swami, we work very hard, the operations go perfectly fine, and yet the patient dies. And so he said, and this is one of the few things that I completely remember him saying. He said, you are all my instruments. And remember, it's not I'm his instrument, you are all his instrument. So he's basically saying the world is his instrument. And he's saying that my responsibility is to the best job I can and feel good that I have done the best job I can. But the ultimate outcome is in his hands. And that death is, he decides who dies and who lives. Mm-hmm. And it's not my responsibility, that's his responsibility.
And does that help you?
Absolutely, because there are many cases where, from a technical point of view, things can go perfectly fine, and yet the patient dies. Mm-hmm. And why does that happen? Mm-hmm. And that's something that you really have to understand, and you need to deal with. Otherwise, one would go crazy.
And probably the reverse is true. I'm just going to guess, and with 1,000 transplants, you would know better than me, so draw from any of these examples. If all the technical things go poorly, all hell breaks loose, and the poor patient has the odds against him or her to begin with multiplied by a factor of 100, let's say, and yet that patient comes through. Mm-hmm. How do you then make sense of that happening with Baba in your hip pocket helping you come through whatever it is, for better or for worse?
So it's interesting. I used to pray, Swami, make this person survive because that's good for me. And I've absolutely, he's changed me into saying, Swami, let me do what is best for that patient, because that is what you want for that patient.
So you're definitely less attached to the outcome.
Correct. And you have to be, because it's either a good outcome or a bad outcome, right? So if you get very attached to a good outcome and you say, oh man, I'm great, I just pulled this off, your ego is going to go right through the roof, and you are going to then if you have a bad outcome, mm-hmm. right, you can't just give that over to Baba and say, okay, that was just a bad outcome and it wasn't my fault. So this way you have to have a balance, and I think Swami is my counterbalance. And so whether there's a good thing or a bad thing, you devote your job to him. You're doing service to him, and he's working through you for the patient. Now, I have a problem with that, because if there's a good outcome, it's very easy for me to give it to Swami. If there's mm-hmm. a bad outcome, then I still feel somehow it was my fault.
That is your problem. And I'm sure he doesn't want you to feel that.
No, he doesn't want me to feel that. But it's a spirituality is a pathway, right? Mm-hmm. So I haven't got there yet, but I'm on the way.
To use your word pathway, which I love, it's my feeling. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. I think one day Swami will set me straight. That the further you go on this pathway, and you're traveling at pretty good speed, pretty good distance right now, it doesn't necessarily mean just because you're spiritual, no matter what your profession is, in my point of view, that life's going to get any easier. There are still, in fact, perhaps just the contrary, mm-hmm. just the opposite, that the obstacles will get stiffer, steeper, and tougher. Does that make sense at all to you?
Oh, absolutely. I think the way I look at it, all the challenges that you are faced with in life are designed for you to meet them and reshape your life. Mm-hmm. And they may not seem that way when the challenges are actually present, but I think clearly when one reflects back afterwards, when there's a time to reflect or the challenges kind of changed focus, then you realize how much those challenges have actually made you better.
Do you ever maintain enough contact with your patients, and I'm not sure how physicians and surgeons can that much, where you have the ability to hear from them later that obviously they were unconscious coming through this life-altering, life-changing, life-saving surgery, where they feel that there's been a special spiritual boost given them just by the mere virtue of the fact that they came through it in one piece? Do they let you know on any level?
We don't spend that much time with them, but I will tell you one thing. You know, you can take two patients. Okay, one may be an 85-year-old who's looking at his second operation and needs a very, very complex heart reconstruction.
Long odds.
Long odds. And that person will come to me with he or she, and he'll say, listen, doc, you do your best, and I believe in God, and if he wants me to live, I will live, and we'll just pray that you're his instrument and I will do well, because I am picturing, you know, a sunny beach and I want to go on vacation, okay? And that person may have low odds of surviving, but I have never lost a patient who has that attitude.
Really?
And then you have the other attitude where you may have a 45-year-old person who needs a very simple operation, who's, you know, doctor shopping, and, you know, if one doctor has a 1.2% mortality and another one has 1.3% mortality, you know, he's shopping,
yeah.
And who wants to know what every single complication can occur, and when he goes into the surgery with that frame of mind, he is going to have every single one of those complications. So I think there is that aspect of release, and you can actually see it in a patient's face. You could see it in how they do after surgery. I mean, you may do an 8-hour long operation, but it's almost like it didn't affect them. They'll come out and they're smiling and they just do remarkably well. Or they may actually have a long post-operative course and still do well. And when they finally regain their senses, etc., they're smiling. So I think a person's mental attitude going to surgery is remarkable. And we always talk about the power of prayer. Mm-hmm. I think the power of prayer is fantastic. I think it's the power of belief and faith. Mm-hmm. And if a patient is able to give their belief and faith to some other higher being and say, okay, that person will take care of me, then they do very, very well.
Turn that around. Do you approach life the same way when you're in an unfamiliar field, whether it's troubles with your car, your family, or your house, when you're not the expert and it's kind of iffy? Do you say to Baba, to God, do what's best for me and I'll be okay with it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, many instances where an airplane's gotten canceled, and you initially start off being really annoyed, and you realize if it's meant to be, it's always meant to be for a reason. And, you realize later that there was a good reason why you missed that plane. Like, for instance, I was supposed to go to Bulgaria, and I had all travel plans arranged. I was supposed to be the keynote speaker, etc., and go to the airport, and the plane was canceled because of the volcanic eruption. And so I was frantically trying to figure out how to reroute myself to get there. And there was one route that went all the way down towards Turkey and back up to Bulgaria that I could have gotten. I went to sign in for the flight and I realized I didn't have my passport. And so I called my daughter, she brought my passport up, I missed that flight, and after I missed that flight, none of the other flights went to Europe. And so I always thought that this was going to be a one-day thing, I could turn it around the next day. And so the trip eventually got canceled, and I was supposed to leave on Thursday and come back on Sunday because I had major surgery scheduled on Monday and I had 2 major presentations on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then I was giving a party for about 120 people on Thursday. Well,
just 120.
The people who were there in Europe, who were supposed to be at the meeting where I was going to give the party, almost none of them were able to fly out of Europe on Thursday. So if I had gone to Turkey and I had my passport, I would have been stuck in Europe and missed everything else.
See?
So at that point, you're annoyed, but I said, well, if there's a reason for this, there must be a reason for it. Mm-hmm. And there certainly was a reason why all that happened.
I would guess there's not too many people with whom you carry on conversations of this nature. I mean, you're in a pretty lofty position. The University of Chicago Medical Center is top flight around the world, of course. If I remember correctly, I should know this, you're the head of the cardiosurgery department?
Right, the cardiac and thoracic surgery department.
You performed all these heart transplants. You're in touch with people all over the world. Just came back from a far-flung tour of people who are trying to pick on your expertise. Do you mind talking about spirituality?
To the right people, I have no problem talking about it. I mean, some people would think of this as like I'm some kind of flake.
But I don't think you worry about that very much.
And you know, even for patients, I can get a sense of what a patient wants to hear. And if you sense a patient who believes in faith or God, you could actually talk to them about it. And it's like the floodgates open up, and they really bond very well. And those are the ones who do very well. And you can get the sense of who wants a scientific talk versus somebody who wants a scientific plus spiritual talk. And this is very similar too. I mean, I open up here, I open up in Sai retreats, but you know, this isn't something that you can come up to my departmental meetings and talk about.
But I don't know if it's still the case, but I remember you telling me a year or two ago that strangers walk into your office, whether they're potential patients or fellow surgeons. There's a picture of Sai Baba somewhere on your desk.
Absolutely,
or on your wall.
There's a picture of Sai Baba on every wall,
so
they can't miss it.
That must provoke some leading questions, I would imagine.
Some people, but mostly they must look at him and they stay away. But it is remarkable how many people know about Sai Baba, and the people who know about Sai Baba you would think have nothing to do with him. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a surgeon who visited me from the middle of Pennsylvania, and you know, it's from Danville, Pennsylvania, kind of middle of nowhere. And he came to me and he looked around and he said, "Oh, that's Sai Baba." And I said, "Wow, how do you know Sai Baba?" And so we have a lot of people who you would have no idea know about Sai Baba would come to my office and say that's Sai Baba.
The $64 question, who is Sai Baba?
Well, I think Sai Baba is different to a lot of people. Okay, to me, you know, he has opened the doors for me to see him as God. Now, some people may think that's far-fetched, and then you know, people say, you know, what is the definition of God? Mm-hmm. So for me, God is somebody who is with me, who's guiding me, and protects me when I need protection, and gives me support. Now, some people may say, well, that's too far-fetched, he's not God. So I tell them, I said, okay, fine. You don't have to think of him as God, and that's okay. But if you think of him as a person, think of how magnificent a person he is. You know, he doesn't ask you for your money. Matter of fact, if you try to give him money, he's going to give it back to you, or he's not going to take it. He doesn't live in luxury. He lives a very, very Spartan life. He comes out, he gives darshan, even though he may be in pain from a back injury or a broken hip or whatever. He rarely misses darshan. And look what he's done. He's created a university that is, you know, free of cost, and has created, you know, thought leaders in the world. He's created a hospital system that is giving free care to the poorest people imaginable. He's given water to countless amounts of people, and he does that for no real recognition. He's not doing it because he wants his name put up in billboards.
In fact, he shuns publicity. I twice asked him, can I take his name to America? And his answer was short and sweet. No, take my love, take my mission to America.
And I had the opportunity where the Discovery Channel was following me because I went there to operate, and he basically said, no, they're not ready for this. Mm-hmm. So he didn't want that to be publicized.
That's amazing.
So certainly he shuns the publicity. So you look at somebody who lives Spartan life, who shuns publicity, and only thing he hasn't asked of anybody other than for us to give love to him and to mankind. He hasn't asked for material goods, and yet all he does is spread his love. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at it from that point of view, you can call him God, you can call him not God, but he is an incredibly great man who's transformed so many souls. So whatever you call him, he is something that is you just can't see in anybody else in the world.
Your mom must be very happy with the little boy she raised.
Well, I suspect that when I was small, she wasn't so happy.
Now, Jody says that she came to Baba because she was looking for a holy man, a holy figure, who would grant her, through one means or another, personal experiences. And I can think of personal experiences to Sai Baba devotees coming through dreams, coming through manifestations, coming through leelas, divine pranks, such as the book in the bag when you couldn't find your novel. Do you have many instances that you can think off the top of your head that you might be able to share with us that might be defined as personal experiences that he gives you, not necessarily to prove his divinity, but just to be supportive to you?
Oh, there's countless, and there are many, many stories. I give you a couple of really short ones. I mean, it was funny. We used to have these cardiovascular symposia, and I had a camera. I was trying to take his picture, and every single time I was taking his picture, I had an autofocus camera, and it was about 15 feet away. The camera working perfectly. You try to take a picture of him, it just goes to infinity, and it just kept going to infinity, and I couldn't take a picture of him. And later on, we were having dinner, and he came up, and he says, "Your camera, what was wrong with your camera?"
So he knew.
And I said, "Well, Swami, it kept going to infinity." And he looked and he said, "I'm infinity."
That's a great one. Another one.
And so, clearly, he lets you know that in those ways that he knows what you're thinking. And to me, that's very powerful, because now when I do something, whether it's in the hospital or at home or talking to somebody, to me, Swami's always sitting there next to me, and he's listening to what I'm saying. So that shapes my world, because I know that I shouldn't say something that's hurtful. I shouldn't say something that shows ego. And if I am going to do a case, well, Swami's right there. So I'm going to do the best I can, because I know Swami's right there.
But you're a very, very busy person. How can you remain consciously aware of his spiritual presence with you all the time like this?
I guess at this point, after many, many years, and other people maybe it's taken a shorter period of time, it's ingrained in me. I can, even when I'm talking, it's like Swami's right there.
Also, I know that this is kind of a complex issue, because I know wonderful devotees who have become friends whose spouses or children not only are not devotees, they sort of shun Sai Baba for whatever their personal reasons are. And that's an obstacle for a lot of people to have to live with, who want to share, at least with their family, Sai Baba. Your family members pretty open-minded about who Sai Baba is?
Well, so it's a complex thing, because we're not a large family. It's I have one sister, and my father has since passed away. So my mom's a devotee.
We know about her.
And my wife Sheila and I are devotees. My children went through Val Jeevanandam, which is their Sai spiritual education, and they're not quite ready to make that leap of faith yet. And we've asked Swami about it, and he says, when it's time, he'll take care of them. So we've basically said, okay, if you told us you're going to take care of them, then you're going to take care of them. And then I have my sister, and her husband is not a Swami devotee at all. My sister's kind of a quasi-Swami devotee. So it's not like our family is all a Sai family. We have different viewpoints, but and we accept that. And that's what you have to do if you're a Swami devotee. You have to accept other people for what they are, because you realize that everybody is on a different pathway. It may be this lifestyle, it may be 10 other lifetimes away or thousands of lifetimes away, but everybody is different. And so everybody's going to be in a different path.
And you're different in a multitude of ways, not the least of which is you're a very public person. That can work both for you and against you, depending on what the subject is. And the reason why I mention this is because I can't speak for Jody as much as I can speak for myself, but I define us as being bridge people. We link person A with deity C or pathway D, whatever it might be. And I think of people as being drop dead, take it to the bank Sai Baba devotees from the get-go, as well as people who are on a spiritual path, don't know about Sai Baba, and are Sai Baba devotees in the waiting. They're yearning to learn about him. It's not that you're going out to sell Sai Baba to anybody, but a casual mention, or they're visiting your office and seeing his picture could open up multitudinous doors towards Sai Baba for people who don't even know they're destined to become his followers. If you were given a chance to speak for a couple minutes from your heart to people who were in that category, thirsting for a teacher, what would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them that, first of all, don't think of him as God, because that is the next level. So think of him as your spiritual guru or advisor, and listen to what the principles of the things that he's saying, which is, love all man, treat everybody equally, respect everybody. Don't think of yourself as better than anybody else because you have because of your ego, and read some of his principles. And those principles may be difficult things to digest, but ultimately they're going to make you into a happier and better person. And once you get to do that, if you think he's God, great. If you don't think he's God, that's still great. But just think of him as your spiritual guide, and see if that, that's how I've usually presented to people. And we have our Swami rooms right in the front of the house. And when we have guests over, some of them will go in and they'll look and they'll, say who's Sai Baba, and we talk about it. And I would say that almost everybody probably goes home and then Google Sai Baba. Mm-hmm. And it's really remarkable because some of them, when they Google, they probably hit the same terms in Google. Mm-hmm. And some of them will only look at all the negative things written about Sai Baba. And some of them will then see the positive aspects of Sai Baba and ask for some books or something. And so I think it's just how, where they are in their journey, what they're going to hit when they hit their Google search.
Back to that original topic we began talking about, that we all become instruments. You can become an instrument for Sai Baba that way. Those who find something less than positive, they're not destined at this moment in time perhaps to learn a Baba, but there are many who do.
And what you can't do is be upset about the person who doesn't believe in Sai Baba right away because you're talking to them. And you really need to understand that it's that person's journey. It's not, and we may be somebody who guides them, and you may guide them, but they may not listen to you right away. They may listen to you 20 years later, because I look at my own journey. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had a lot of people telling me about Sai Baba. In 1975, when I was in India, I was only 15 years old, and my aunt said, hey, there's this spiritual person, we call him Sai Baba. You come to Kodaikanal, and there'll be about 10 people there. You can ask him any question you want, and he'll answer you right away. And I said, are you kidding me? I'm not going to spend my vacation going up there. Now think about that, I mean, I had the opportunity 20 years before I actually knew Sai Baba to be at a very tiny hands of people with Sai Baba. But it wasn't my time. And so she was the person. I think about it now. I didn't even think about it then. Just like if you're trying to talk to somebody who may come back to you and say, hey, Ted, Sai Baba's a fraud. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine. But then 20 years later, he may change. Yeah. He may not change. Who knows? But we can't determine that. We can only do what, we're capable of talking to somebody, but you shouldn't look at the consequences.
And one of the last questions I want to ask you is, from a spiritual perspective, if you can answer it spiritually, that would be fine. What's the source and the reason for your profound gift as a healer?
Well, again, I'm an instrument. So the source of my gift is going to be God or Sai Baba. And I think he's using me purely as an instrument, and he's used that instrument for several things. He's used me as an instrument to help other people, and he's also used that instrument for him to help me. Because if I wasn't a heart surgeon, I wouldn't be working in the hospital there at Puttaparthi, and so I wouldn't have a chance to interact with him. I wouldn't have had the chance for him to give me direct lessons. If I wasn't a transplant surgeon, they probably would never have invited me way early on. You had asked me, how did I actually get there, and how did that transplant get there? Well, when I went there in 1993, I went there, and in India, everybody respects gray hair, and so you go there. I was very young, and you go there as a heart surgeon, and they're like, who are you? And so the only thing I kind of had in my resume that the doctors could understand is, oh, he's a heart transplant surgeon, director of a heart transplant program, and one of the people who's doing the most heart transplants in the world. So that was Swami giving me kind of a card to get into the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so then they said, well, why don't you come and give us a talk on heart transplant? So that was kind of, he was giving me the card to play to get into the realm. Mm-hmm. So, as I said, it's a two-way street. He's given me the ability to help others, but more important than that, he has used that to help me.
And a totally off-the-wall final question. When you're no longer useful as a heart surgeon performing heart transplants because you will be retired, mm-hmm. any idea what you think you might do to round out that part of your life, again, from a spiritual perspective?
It's a great question. I think what I would probably end up doing is do charity work in medicine without having to actually operate. Mm-hmm. So you could do administrative work, you can do teaching. There's a lot of other things that one can do from a medical point of view to help others without actually having to operate. And I think that's probably what I would focus on. You asked me a couple of these other leelas, if you want to.
I'd love to hear about them.
They're plentiful, but again, he uses my mother as a lot of these instruments of leela. So even recently, in the past, Swami would always talk and he would joke, and we would always have interviews. Well, for the last 5 years, we really have not had interviews. But when we're in the veranda, he'll come and he'll interact with us for a very short period of time. And I think he does that because he wants us to grow up. I have grown up more in the 5 years that I've not had interviews than I did in the 15 years when I used to get interviews on a regular basis.
That might be one of the most interesting things that we hear from you tonight, because that's profound. And because he's asking you to go inside, not
absolutely. So when I used to go, that whole week was focused on when am I going to get the interview, what's Swami going to say, what are the material questions you're going to ask. So in the past, I would spend the whole week, we would work, and then we would expect and anticipate the interview with Swami. I'd actually write a lot of questions, and friends would say, oh, ask Swami this for me, etc. So we would write all the questions, and we would have the interview, and he would answer the questions and materialize rings or bracelets or things, and we would come back and happy that Swami's acknowledged the fact that you're there. But 5 years ago, he stopped doing that, and I think he's doing that less and less mm-hmm. all around. And so then you go in and you realize that you're not going to get that personal relationship with Swami, but when you're sitting in the veranda, you're waiting for Swami, you actually go into a next level. And I think I have now understood a lot more about spirituality over the last 5 years, not getting an interview, than in the past. And it's not like he completely abandons you. If you really have a burning question, you ask him, but he will give you more cryptic answers now, not direct mm-hmm. answers. He'll give you very cryptic answers. And so he's making you look within yourself for the answers.
And you promised us another 1 or 2 Leela's miracles, dreams, or manifestations.
So, as I said, in the last 5 years, we've not had interviews where you've gone in and had a personal one-on-one, but like in the veranda, he uses that time to show at least me that he is omnipotent and omnipresent. So, last time we went, my mom, she does a lot of seva work, and so she sees a lot of people who are sick, and she wants to give them vibhuti, and she'd like to give them vibhuti from Swami. So Swami gave us vibhuti before, and you know how it is, you take life for granted. So every single time he would give us so much vibhuti that we had quite a large stash, and we said, every single time we would just get vibhuti. And then he hasn't given us any in 5 years, so we ran out. So my mom said, ask Swami for vibhuti. And so I was sitting there in darshan line, and this was the first day, I had just traveled. Actually, I had just traveled, and I arrived there in Puttaparthi at 5 o'clock in the morning, had a quick shower, and then went to work, and then came out again 5 o'clock in the evening time and sat for darshan. So I was quite tired. And I figured Swami in the past would never even acknowledge the fact I was there, give me a couple of days to acclimatize myself before he would, have me come up. So this time Swami came right around, he looked at me, he smiled, and he gave me a couple of vibhuti packets, and he says, your mother wanted these, here you go. So those are, the other thing is like pod namaskar. Pod namaskar is where you can get blessed on his feet. You massage his feet, kiss his feet, etc. And I've always wanted to do that, but a lot of times now he comes in a wheelchair and people just kind of throw themselves at him, and I didn't want to really do that. So I wanted to ask him, yet I didn't want to ask him. And so we were there during one of the festivals, Sivaratri, and I was thinking, boy, it would be really nice if I could get Swami's Pod Namaskar in a festival time like this. Now, wouldn't that be grand? So Swami goes by, and he turns around to get into his car. And as he's getting into his car, and I'm thinking about this, he turned around, he smiled at me, he took his leg, and he put it on my leg. So that was kind of like his way of giving me Pada Namaskar without me actually having to get up and get his feet blessed. And
when that happens to you, you just sit back in awe and bewilderment and wonder, how much does he really know about your every thought and desire?
Oh, I think he knows it all.
I got a question here from Sheila. Swami who saved patient? Tell me about
Okay, want the whole story? Okay. So we had, a patient came to me in clinic, and he said that, he had 3 previous operations, and he had a bad infection of one of his valves. So his valve was actually loose, and basically he was going to die unless someone tried to fix him up. And he'd gone to about 4 other hospitals, and everybody just said, you're too high risk. If we touch you, you're going to die. And actually, some people said, if anybody operates on you, you're going to die. So just live your life for what you have and just accept it. And so he came to me, and he said, well, they told me I needed to come and see you. So I said, okay, fine. We'll operate on you, yet understand the risk. So we're operating on him, and this case was about 4 hours into it, and we still even hadn't figured out where his heart was. I mean, that's how stuck he was, and this was a very, very difficult case. And I'm honestly thinking, okay, this time, maybe this is one of those things that you just kind of give up on, close him up, and say there's nothing you can do. So one of our anesthesiologists walks in now. She's a little bit of a Lulu bird there, so we don't necessarily listen to her all the time. And she was coming, and she's starting to talk. And I was actually getting quite annoyed because we're frustrated in what's going on in the field, and this woman's talking. So she comes in and she goes, hey, Val, do you know this guy's story? And I'm like, okay, I don't know this guy's story. I want to know where his heart is. So she goes, well, I saw him in clinic, or I saw him in pre-op, and he was telling me this story that he was driving in his car, and his heart basically went into a bad rhythm because his heart was so sick. And so he fainted at the wheel, and he hit a gas line.
Oh my goodness.
And they found him about 200 feet away from where his car had hit the gas line.
It exploded and blew him away?
And so they asked him, what was going on, and he said that somebody in an orange robe pulled him out of the car. And then the person in the orange robe told him to, a person is going to tell you where you're going to have surgery, go to that person because he will take care of you. And so the guy goes to the emergency room at a hospital. Now, I had just given a lecture to the people in that hospital about 3 days ago and told them about the high-risk things that we did. So a person came up to him right away and he said, you have a really bad heart problem. There's one person who can take care of you. You need to go to the University of Chicago and have this person take care of you.
And it was you.
Well, yeah.
It had to have been. And this Lulu bird is chirping away, talking while you're trying to figure out where this patient's heart is.
Right.
And so, tell me more. Was there an eventual outcome that was pleasing to the patient?
Well,
Did he survive?
so she's telling me this, and I'm listening in the back of my ear, and I'm saying, my God, she's talking about Swami. So Swami came, saved this person from a gas main leak.
So that he could get to you.
Told him to come to me. Mm-hmm. And why am I feeling that I can't do this when he clearly wants me to get this done?
Work harder, dig deeper.
There you go. Exactly what I said. I said, you better, get off your duff and don't get so depressed and get this guy fixed. So, and after that, remarkably, we kind of found the right planes and everything went well. We operated on him. He actually did great. And he went home.
That's an amazing story.
And then...
and you didn't think of telling us the story yourself?
And then, a while later, I was telling this story to a Sai group, and they said, you need to confirm this. You need to see if you actually saw Swami. I said, well, I'm not going to go confirming this. So he came back to clinic, and our clinic is located about half a mile away from my actual office. Mm-hmm. And so they're a generic clinic, so we don't have any pictures or anything like that. Yeah. And so he was supposed to come to clinic, and my clinic is in the morning till 11 o'clock. And he couldn't make it because of the weather, so he came around 12:30. And so I was already in my office, which is on another building, and that's my personal office, so I have Swami's pictures all over the place. Mm-hmm. And so the guy comes late, and he said that he was supposed to get up at 8 o'clock. His alarm clock didn't go off. He only got up at like 10, and so he's late, and he apologized, and he said, hey, can I just see you? And usually I'm busy, and I don't like to do that, but I said, fine, come on over to the office. Actually, even, nobody in the university likes to have patients come over to the hospital. So he comes in my office, and lo and behold, my office, we have a lot of pictures of Sai Baba. So he
walks to the
door, and he says, hey, how do you know that guy? He's the one who pulled me out of the car.
Oh, come on.
Oh, no.
That's just a fantastic story.
So you can see how I couldn't have told you this story if you had come on time and seen me in my generic clinic, because I never would have asked him about Sai Baba.
Of course. Well, all I can think of, and maybe this is a good place for us to take an intermission until chapter 2 next year when we're in Chicago to visit you. And the last comment is, if I were in your shoes, it would just melt me in the way it would humble me, these experiences that you have. I mean, these life and or death experiences, not to mention just the spiritual leelas that come for your own soul's benefit, but for the lives of people you serve as a heart surgeon. Does it humble you? How does it humble you?
Well, it humbles me in the fact that I have to understand that this is not me, and that I'm an instrument. And so then once you think of it that way, then you're humbled. And humbled in the sense that you have to think that it's not me doing this. It's somebody else working through me. It's God working through me, or Salami working through me doing this. Mm-hmm. And then that takes away your ego. There's always a little bit of ego, and that's gotten me in nothing but trouble. And I know it has. So, the more I can, and I think I know Swami's working on even chopping that little bit of ego away. And again, it's a process, it's a journey. But I can tell you, every once in a while you start doing a lot of cases and things go very, very well, and you get annoyed when other people can't do what you're doing, and you start feeling that you're the one who can do it. And I can tell you, once you start feeling that way, you're going to have some bad results come right afterwards. And it's invariable, and I know when I'm starting to sense that, and I need to turn that off right away. And over the last 5 years, I've come to the pathway where I can see where I'm deviating and come right back without him necessarily telling me that right away.
Wow. And in that interval that you've been answering this last question, I do remember now the last question I wanted to ask you. And I'll set it up in such a way that you can pass on it. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to. It's my contention that men have a little more difficulty feeling than do women. And yet, as a scientist, there's not a whole lot of room built in to feel, to be in touch with your emotions. Has your journey with Swami and your scientific track at the same time brought you closer to feeling who you are, to feeling the joy, the bliss, the happiness of the spiritual path that you are actively on mentally? Are you also there? Can you talk about the spiritual component? The feeling component.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a tough one.
I think it's getting there. However, there have been a lot of challenges that maybe we can do in part 2 that have made me more empathetic towards people, and I understand more if I say something that is bad. Before I say it, I now think about how it's going to affect people, and I don't want to hurt their feelings. Like before, when I was younger, you would just say something, and then you would realize that, or maybe you never realized that it would actually hurt somebody when you said it. And I think I'm much more attuned to that now. And like even with patients, if someone says you have pain, before you maybe say, just live with it, it's okay. And now you have to understand that, what they're going through, what their family's going through, what their, everybody else is going through. And so I think I've become much more open to other people's feelings. And maybe perhaps that is my feelings towards them are changing as well.
Val, thank you very much. That will be the subject for part 2. Same time, same station a year from now, and we're in Chicago. Okay?
All right.
Thank you, and Sai Ram.
Sai Ram.